What if I told you Microsoft has a very good solution for connecting your operations to your IT infrastructure and to the cloud? Well, that's called Azure IoT Operations, and Ranga, PM in the Azure IoT team, is here on the IT show to show us how that works and what's in the box. If you like this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, give us a comment. Thank you. Hey everyone, this is the IoT Show. I'm Olivier, your host, and today on the show we have Ranga with us, Ranga from the Azure IoT team at Microsoft. And today we want to talk about Azure IoT Operations. Before we jump into the topic, and Ranga, you came with demos, it's going to be a demo-heavy episode today. I would like for you to tell us how you're doing and who you are.
Sure. Thank you, Olivier. Finally, we do this show again. And I'm glad I'm doing this show with you. I'm Ranga Vadlamudi. I'm a product manager on the Azure IoT team, focusing on Azure IoT Operations. And the last couple of years, we've been working on this product, and we released Azure IoT Operations to GA in November at Ignite. And really excited to talk through the product with you.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm super excited as well because I used to be in your team and we were colleagues working together. And Azure IT Operations, whatever code name we had at the time, was in the works, and I was super eager to see it coming out so that I could talk about it, as I'm no longer with Microsoft, but I'm super interested in what's going on. You guys have been working hard at implementing a solution that responds to customer needs. And so Azure IoT Operations is really about helping that OT and IT integration. OT is doing its thing. Operations is generating often a lot of data, and IT wants to use it because you can enhance business by leveraging that huge amount of data that OT can produce. But then you also want to have close monitoring and start working on AI in the cloud to optimize your processes and so on. So I really love where things are going, and you came with lots of demos. I'd like for you to give us the gist of what is AIO from your perspective, and then you'll show us how that works. And my understanding is that we'll try and change hats, see how things are looking like from the OT perspective and then from the IT perspective.
Yes, and great point, right? Thanks for bringing up the personas. And what we'll do is this, the demos I'll go through will be very persona-based. And we'll talk through about how we enable IT, OT, and also the other personas like the developer persona and data analyst, data scientist persona. And we'll make sure that we are enabling like this individual sites, as well as if the companies are across different locations across globe, how do you manage your operations? So two things will happen here, right? One is we'll talk through as we go through the demos on the personas, and we'll switch hats as we go through the demos. But also what we'll do is we'll make sure that we are also looking into the lens of how operations are enabled, as well as how analytics is enabled, right? Okay. So that way we're taking advantage of the features we have built for the operations teams, but also as we land the data, how does the business units take advantage of the data which is landing wherever it's
and we'll see what shape that takes. But I know for a fact that the conversation around unifying and normalizing data from OT is really important because you have various sources of data in different formats with different meanings, and you need to provide that set of data or these sets of data to your business units in a way that they can digest it. They're not experts in the OT world or operations world. They're experts in data. And so they need to have things organized to a certain extent so they can consume that seamlessly, right?
Yes. And Azure IT Operations, we built it to enable our customers manage their physical operations. And what it does is it enables customers to have a unified management plane and a unified data plane, right? That
Okay.
at the very simplistic uh, like capability, I'm just calling it out, not going into the uh, details, right? Too much
Okay.
details. And that's why we don't have a deck. We'll go through, we'll see it how it happens with our live demos, right? So,
Let's do this.
all
Let's
right.
do this, Ranga. So let's imagine I have a factory floor with a bunch of, operation machines, assets, or whatnot, using industrial protocols. What's next? How do I bring in AIO into my factory, and how do I manage it?
Sure. So let's start off with the IT role, right? So IT is going to enable OT by preparing all the tools so that they can actually enable their operations to be running at max, right? So in the marketplace, we have Azure IoT Operations. The customer clicks on it, and they're able to deploy Azure IT Operations. At this point, I want to just call out that IT prepares a cluster. And what does that mean, right? So uh, the customers can pick commodity hardware. The minimum requirements are 16 GB RAM and then 4-core processor with a single node, right? But for resiliency, etc., you can actually go multi-node. And also, if you want the rack scale where uh, they want to come to Microsoft to be able to get recommendations. So we have Azure Local, which is a rack scale product, which is certified by Microsoft, enabled by our partners. So customers can pick that. And along with that, right, if you're going with your bare metal, you have to install your OS. We support uh, Linux and Windows, which is basically AKS Edge Essentials. And also, you need Kubernetes flavors. So we currently certify K3S. Any CNCF distribution customer should be able to pick. We will have certification process for the others. But overall, those are the hardware requirements. So you assume that IT has gone through all this, have the cluster prepared, and now they're ready for Azure IT operations. Right?
Okay, got it. And that cluster will be located on premises where the assets are and hooked up to like the local networks where you have these assets communicating, right?
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
And also another power of we call it the adaptive cloud is where we want to be able to bring the capabilities of IT, be able to manage these from the cloud. And what
Mhm.
adaptive cloud does is it helps you first of all enable the unified, brings in that unified management capabilities, unified data capabilities, and it also helps you look at your estate through one pane of glass, right? So you could have like uh, your cloud uh, assets, which could be VMs, etc. Then you could have your edge, you could have your IoT devices, and also any multi-cloud kind of assets, right?
Okay.
So there is a capability called Azure Arc, which basically helps customers to be able to do that and have that unified experience. And that's what we are trying to do here, where we are basically uh, telling the customer, you have your cluster right now, and now start to deploy Azure
Okay.
IT operations. Okay.
Sounds good.
So I'll jump in here and basically I have that cluster, which is has doesn't have Azure IT operations yet, uh, and what they can customer can go pick the version of Azure IT Operations, and also we tell them, hey, these are all the components which are deployed, which are together Azure IT Operations, right?
Hmm.
They get like an MQTT broker, an OPC UA connector, which can connect into servers, etc. And this is a wizard. Uh, it's for another show where we'll actually walk you through the wizard for
Okay.
an IT person. But what this
Hmm.
does is at the end, it deploys Azure IoT operations onto that Kubernetes cluster and gets you ready to be able to hand it over to OT, right?
Sounds good.
Uh, so now we'll jump into what does that cluster mean, right, after it is deployed. So it's still, we are still at the IT level. So we give
Hmm.
them a blade. It's Azure IT Operations blade. There's a few capabilities here which I want to talk about. And like, for example, I talked about the MQTT broker, right? So IT can come to this blade and start to enable a few things for the whole end-to-end process to work. Uh, they could basically open like ports for things to connect into to send data, right?
Okay.
So what I've done is I've created a couple of ports here, which are basically available for things to communicate into that port
Hmm.
so that they can land the data. I'll create one to show you the what does adaptive cloud mean, right? At this
Okay.
point, IT is wanting to add a port, right? I'll use 1886 and give it a name. I'll call it, it's a node port. So I'll call it a broker node port. And if I go to my cluster and I'm looking at a service called broker node port in that namespace of Azure IT Operations, there's nothing found right now. And
Okay.
from the cloud, I go in and create a listener. And what this does is it has accepted the request. So
Hmm.
there's a request which is going from the cloud into the edge and using Azure Arc. And that's where you're
Hmm.
basically managing your whole estate in one place, right? And that's the power of adaptive cloud. And here,
Yep.
uh, the request has been submitted. It says the uh, listener has been created. If you refresh, it has succeeded. Now I'll go back to my cluster and I'll look at the same namespace. And at this point, if you see, uh, that request landed on the edge.
Yep.
So
Gotcha. Yeah.
it's like within seconds, it's there, right? And
Yeah.
that's how you're able to manage from the cloud into the air. And that's the power of adaptive cloud.
Yeah,
And
and that's interesting because what everything you just showed for someone who was working in IT, if you had been working against a VM that would be deployed on Azure on another cloud, that would be the exact same thing. That IT operation is running on a cluster that is Arc enabled, meaning that it has an identity
yes,
and it is manageable from Azure through Azure Arc.
yes. And what this
Gotcha.
does is, especially for enterprise IT, they can have that view of all the clusters and they are able to manage these clusters from the cloud so that you really don't have to have a heavy IT per site, right? At that point. And also, what Adaptive Cloud does for you is you're able to apply policies and other aspects of your IT in a consistent way across your sites, whether
Mhm.
it belongs in one continent, it could belong in across the continents, and that's the power of Adaptive Cloud.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
Another thing which, before I jump into the OT part, I'll show you is there are different aspects of Azure IoT operations and different components which are deployed. And you can basically look at them. Like, for example, this is a Kubernetes cluster. You can look at all the pods which have been deployed, which are basically enabling Azure IT operations, right? And once you get to this, this is more like I'm showing you behind the scenes. You don't really have to uh, use any of these capabilities because we let you manage through the experiences.
Okay.
Uh, and I'm just showing you that all these are available. You can start if you really want to get into. You can look at what some of these mean. And for example, if I want to go look at a pod, You can go look at the logs, and it'll pretty much show you how the logs are behaving, et cetera, et
Yeah.
cetera. This is more on the cluster, right?
Yeah, and that's a developer who is debugging or
Correct.
setting things up, but that's more of a developer experience here, right?
Correct. All right. So now what we'll do is we'll move on from here. We
Hmm.
have looked at how IT manages their things, the power of the cloud, how they're able to get to the edge by doing stuff on the cloud. Now, I'll jump into the more like the OT experience. And here, what we have done is we have built a curated experience for the operations team, so they're just dealing with things they know. Okay, so that they don't have to deal with all the capabilities of IT. They could get lost there, right? So that was the whole reason we built this experience. And here, uh, the site manager, the site OT engineer, the production manager, all of them are players here, right? So they can really look at it. And also the enterprise OT. Like, for example, there could be an enterprise OT director who's managing all their sites, and they have a view of all their sites, and they can start to look at uh, every site on a
Hmm.
daily basis to make sure that operations are going well. So here I have like a bunch of sites. I'll pick a site. So I'm clicking this site. It has a bunch of clusters. I landed on this cluster, and we talked about this. This is what IT prepared for the OT. And we have like an overview page where every day OT can come and look at, hey, are things okay? If anything is erroring out, they can work with IT to make sure that
Hmm.
all the operations are always up and running, right? So great
Okay.
view for somebody like doing a stand up in the OT on a daily basis. They can come and look at it. Um,
Yep.
and then what we'll do is we'll start off with how do you connect into really working with assets, right? So we have something called asset endpoints. And currently, what we have done is we have enabled OPC UA connectivity. And if you look at the documentation, we also support OnWIF and media. We have media streams, which we support. We are going to bring that into the OT experience pretty soon. But
Okay, so
overall,
that's about the southbound connectors, right? As in, this is the infrastructure that
correct,
OT has with the PLCs and the assets behind and so on, right? So basically, that's the endpoints for these assets to be connected to that AIO instance that you have on site.
correct. And that's where you're actually going there for that connectivity to be able to acquire data or
Hmm.
even interact with them to be able to manage those, right?
Okay,
And definitely southbound into uh, actually getting to the assets itself, right?
that's good. Yeah.
Then another thing which I want to call out is the data flow endpoints, which is northbound,
Mhm.
right? Where you want to, once you uh, whatever data you have collected and you want to send that data, whether you send it as is or you could apply transformations, you could do contextualization, or any of those operations. But where do you land that data, right? So what we have done is we have consolidated all these connectivity experiences into, if you see, right, we enable connectivity into Fabric, into
Mhm.
Event Grid, Event Hub. You could have your own Kafka brokers, the data lake storage. It's up to you on what your use case is,
Yeah.
right?
And that's interesting here, Ranga, because in the past we've seen scenarios where we had a cloud gateway for
Mhm,
everything that was at the edge, and everything was actually connecting through that cloud gateway. And that's for different set of scenarios using Azure IoT Hub.
mhm,
Here we are directly from the edge connecting to the various Azure services. We have a more capable edge instance that is managed through Azure Arc, and we are able to hook up directly to the services we want to send the data to or leverage from the edge in that data flow endpoints connections. I find it a paradigm shift or an addition to the capabilities, I would say. And I would reinforce that this extends Azure capabilities, to the edge, and that reinforces that message of adaptive cloud, because now you can deal with that. And a layer that is not really mentioned here but is behind all of that is security, is that you are in a very safe
Yeah.
environment here, where you're managing through Azure Arc. Everything is authenticated, that cluster has that identity, and you basically allowing this entity, which is outside of your network, which is on premises, to access your Azure resources in a very safe and secure way.
Perfect. And that's where like we support system managed identity, user managed identity, where what you're doing is you're bringing in this edge uh, cluster or capabilities and securely connecting into Azure, right? And
Okay.
then those capabilities are inbuilt, and it's almost like you'll get the experience of working in the cloud where you're setting up your event hubs, etc. Uh, that kind of connectivity experience is brought in here.
Yeah. And so if I want to do data transformation, enrichment, adding information in there and so on, I would assume that it's done from here, and it's going to be a very seamless experience as well, right?
Correct. So what we'll do next is we have set up all the southbound connectivity, the northbound connectivity, right?
Yep.
The next thing where I'll go is we have capabilities where you can create assets. Assets are, it's up to you, right? How do you want to define whether it's
Mhm.
logical, physical? It's up to you. We have made it very flexible. And I'll actually go over one of them, right? Here I've set up an oven. It represents an oven in a location, right,
Mhm.
in your factory. And what we have done is you can define your properties, etc., customize them however you want, right? Because the data is at the end lands somewhere where business units can relate all of this, right? So we
Mhm.
have made it flexible to add as much information as you want. And also, what we have done is we have added something called default MQTT topic. And this is where I want to bring in the concept of UNS, unified namespace. So, unified namespace is a pretty popular concept in the industry. And what that does is it helps companies to be able to unify the data from different places, right? You can define it in such a way that you can land data in one place so that you're breaking those silos. And that's where UNS helps. So what we have done is we have built that into Azure IT Operations. Here, I'll give you an example. I've built a hierarchy of what the customer understands, right? It can be anything, right? I'm saying, by the way, I have a hierarchy of Washington State, Redmond City. There's a building one, line one, and ovens uh, is where I want all the data to land. So I'm landing all the oven data, whether there are 10 ovens, 100 ovens, into one
Mhm.
place. So I can apply transformations together. I can do things together because it's meaningful for me. Customers can choose however they want to do it, right? So very powerful feature which is enabled natively within Azure IT Operations. And I'll show
Yeah.
you how it will carry over into analytics. Right now, we are in operations. I'll show you how this UNS will land in the analytics space. Okay,
Sounds good. Sounds good.
and
And I
then
just want to bring up the fact that UNS is not something that Microsoft made up. It's something that the industry is
correct,
broadly adopting as the way to unify and normalize data from all these different types of assets with data in different formats, different units, whatnot. UNS is that concept that allows normalizing and really leveraging all that data from different sources, but not a concept from Microsoft, a concept from the industry. And I really appreciate the fact that you guys are embracing what's going on out there.
correct. Awesome. So then also, I won't go into too much detail. I think we have other videos
Yeah.
which call out the details. But here, I'm calling out data points where you can set up for your use case, what data points do you want? I'm actually pulling like temperature, weight, energy use, etc., from that
Mhm.
asset. And I'm telling it to publish it'll start with publishing to MQTT. And from there, we can take it to the cloud. Right?
Okay.
Then once we have that, we can go into data flows. So data flows, what we are doing is we are taking asset data and we are basically taking that as a source. So if you look at this, uh, we have like a low code no code experience where you can build those transformations. I'll
Mhm.
walk you through here. What we have done is I'm taking an oven as the source of data, and then at the end I'm sending it to an event hub. Okay, the data will land in event hub, but in between I'm doing transformations. So I can do compute, I can do
Mhm.
filter. We are bringing in a lot more capabilities, but you can rename, you can add new properties, and all that, right? So overall what I'm doing is I'm taking a source, I'm doing transformations, and then I send the data off to the cloud. Okay. So
Okay.
from here, now, what I'm showing you is the data is landing in Event Hub, right? Couple of things I wanted to point out here is, along with the data points like energy use, temperature, I've done a transformation of the temperature. But also,
Mhm.
what I've done is I've added a few metadata, like an asset ID and
Mhm.
also a site hierarchy, right? The site
Okay.
hierarchy is the topic which I was using, but I wanted to take advantage of this in the analytical space, right? So
Okay.
once I have this data, next what I did was I used uh, event streams to be able to uh, get that data into Fabric, right? And then I'm using like the power of Fabric to be able to slice and dice the data on however meaningful I can make it to the business units.
Okay.
So one of the things what I've done is I've used Copilot. So I'm telling it, by the way, I have a site hierarchy. I want to break that down into columns, okay? And so that the data analyst can make meaningful uh, uh, usage of that data. If you
Mhm.
give them a topic, they don't know what it is, right? So when I run this query, first of all, I use Copilot. I just type in some English and ask a question. It gave me a query, a KQL
Okay.
query, right? It's pretty powerful, right? And because I wouldn't know how to write that query if I'm a business owner, but I want to make use of that data, or a data analyst, or even a data scientist, right? So then I run this query, and it breaks down the data. By the way, I want to run one before this, where I want to show you that I'm actually breaking down the data. But if you look at it right now, I have
Mhm.
columns which are broken down into state, city, building, line, etc. Right? So it's more meaningful for me to now work with it. Then what I do is I bucketize these by minute to see how the data is landing. So I run another query asking Copilot more English questions, and it gives me a KQL. And from here, I have the data landed. Then you can add a visual on top of it, right? Like you can do a line
Yeah.
chart and get the data, right?
This is all the power of Microsoft, all the power of Microsoft Fabric, right? As a business person, you're able to manage that data that has been unified, normalized at the edge. It's been sent up to Fabric in that one lake, whatever storage doesn't matter. And now you're leveraging KQL and the Fabric infrastructure basically to do whatever you want with that data. It's pretty powerful.
Correct. And I want to close out with mainly the developer, right? I think we talked about all the other four personas. So
Hmm.
developer, what we have is we have APIs and CLI where they can actually
Hmm.
use those to be able to go at scale, right? For example,
Okay.
they want to do the same setup in, like, let's say 100 other factories, right? At that point, APIs come into play, CLI comes into play, where they can automate things, right?
Yep.
And go at scale. So, and also we have like activity logs, etc., built into the experiences, where if you go change an asset, a supervisor can go look, hey, who changed the asset definition,
Hmm.
right? So that they are able to track everything,
Okay. No, that
right?
that was all pretty powerful, Ranga. So, and interestingly, once you have your data up in Fabric, you can also do all the analytics, generate machine learning models, and redeploy them at the edge because AIO will allow you to run workloads down at the edge to do more with the data. You can do anomaly detection, you start doing predictive maintenance, and all these kind of scenarios are enabled. But it was super seamless and easy to bring that data from down there up to the cloud. Something really interesting that I now realize even more than when I was working with you guys is how rich IT operation is in terms of features. It's not just an infrastructure. It's not just a Kubernetes or whatever runtime. It's actually a very rich infrastructure to connect these assets, manage the data at the edge, and send it in a secure way up to the right services in the cloud. And that's actually really rich and really powerful. And so, Ranga, I think we're going to have you again on the show because there's way more that we want to talk about. But this is a really great overview of Azure IT operations. I'm really glad you came on the show for that today.
No, thank you, Olivier, for the opportunity, and it was great. And I always love a podcast with you.
Yeah,
It's
and we'll
awesome.
have more. We'll definitely have more. Everyone, thanks for tuning in, Ranga. See you soon. Cheers.